Whether you're a beginning gardener or one that has years of experience, it pays to take a look at the tools you're using and study them just as much as you study the plants that you're going to grow in the garden. And so we're going to cover a few small tools, large tools, and also look at the difference between wheelbarrows and garden carts. If you're picking out a garden cart, of course you want the one that's good quality, but also keep in mind what you're going to use it for. A garden cart has very large wheels for big mechanical advantage. It has a square bed to it for the most part, and so it's not one that you use to dump loads of soil real easily like with a wheelbarrow, but it has tremendous mechanical advantage, so you can load in things like sacks of fertilizer, peat moss, bales of straw, and you can wander all over your place with great ease. Now you can't maneuver up and down rows very easily with it, and that's where a wheelbarrow comes in handy. Also, if you're loading up things to take to the compost, you want to be able to dump them and upend them easily. Now with both these tools, and I think of them as tools in the garden, the tires are your way of getting around, and so you want to pay attention to them. Just like before you go riding on a bicycle, you always push on the tires or squeeze them to see if they need air. Do that with your garden cart, and especially do it with your wheelbarrow, because it has only one wheel and you're depending on that to get around. Another thing on wheelbarrows, most of them have wooden handles that extend all the way to the front, and if they're left out in the weather, the initial lacquer on them comes off pretty quickly, and so you want to sand that down and soak it with or coat it with boiled linseed oil a couple times a year. If you store it, rinse it off or brush it off, dry it and store it indoors, it's not going to weather nearly so fast, but those handles back there can get splintered pretty fast, and so you want to make sure that you keep it coated. Now let's take a look at some of the smaller tools that we use around the garden. These are among my favorites for working around raised bed gardens, and one of these is a garden cultivator, and I have two designs here. This is one that was available for a number of years, and it comes off and has interchangeable heads on it. But mostly what I want to show you is the angle of it. I want you to see the difference on those two. This one is flat, and you have to kind of slap at the soil to get good cultivating action, where this one has sharper tines that come more to a point than these do, and it's angled so that you can draw through the soil very easily using it. And then this has a little backside for chopping off weeds, so that's real nice. The main thing is the quality of those blades and the angle of them. Think about how you're going to be holding it in the garden. This one you've got to kink your wrist more to use. One other point is in how the tool itself is attached to the handle. And notice the difference between this trowel and this little cultivator. Now this trowel is built as all one piece, and that's a nice quality tool. It has a handle on there for a comfortable grip for your hand. This one is in two pieces, and sometimes, especially if this is a wooden handle, this will start to weather and the front end of it will come off, and then you end up seeing them in garage sales, and they're really not much good for anybody. Last of all, comparing trowels. A narrow one like this is just ideal if you're planting bulbs or small plants where you want to dig over into the soil and just make a small hole. And then a wider garden trowel is good for digging larger holes. Now this is an area that we're just getting ready to rototill, so it's a little bit compacted, but I mostly want you to observe the differences, and that really for small gardening tools it's handy to have one of each of these. And over here, this is something that we're starting to see more at local garden centers, and it's called a mattock. And I brought it out to the studio gardens, and one of our volunteers said, "What are you doing with that hatchet?" And it's meant for just chopping through soil. And again, it gives you nice mechanical advantage. It has a lot of weight to it, and so it's good for chopping up clods of manure. And the opposite side of it is good if you're digging out a plant and you want to chop through a root. It has a very comfortable handle on it, so this is a nice quality tool. It has a sister to it that I really don't use quite as often. It has the same head for chopping, and then this opposite end has a little cultivator fork on it. And I find that I use the single point one a little more than the one that has 3 points on it. But those are all nice small tools that you might want to think about investing in. Then we get into the larger tools, and I want to give you some tips on picking them out, especially as we get closer to the time of year and you think about buying gifts for gardeners. The two things that a gardener needs as a basic set of digging tools are a gardening fork like this. Some people call it potato fork. It's not a pitchfork. It has blades that are broad and they're meant for cultivating through the soil and digging. But you want that, and you want a decent garden spade. And with these two tools right here, you can do a great deal of work around your garden. You can use the garden spade to dig in and shape the edge of beds and dig soil. Use the fork itself to dig things up and also to work materials into the soil. So they both have their uses. But let's take a look at some of the quality features of them. Now on this fork, the tines of it, right here, just like a fork you eat with, are fairly flat. On the back side, they do have a bit of a bevel on them. But take a look at what has happened over time. They're out of alignment, and as you dig through soil, it's not going to work as efficiently as one that might have been built with a little bit stronger materials. And here's a small one. Now, this is a child's gardening fork that I use for digging perennials or cultivating small areas. What I like about it is it has square tines. See how blocky they are? That's very strong. And another point is this is all one unit as it connects to the wooden handle. It's one nice, straight, strong piece of steel. This is just one that is inserted, put this one down, inserted in the end here, has a little cap on it, then another part, and so there's a place right here where weakness could occur over time or it could get loose. So it pays to go with a little higher quality tine on the end of it. Now looking on up the top end, this is a great feature on this spading fork, and what I like about it is you can get some nice leverage when you dig in. You can put your hand through and lift up like that, and that works out real well. This one has a T-shaped handle that's a little bit harder. Again, this was built for small children and just a little bit different design. Now let's move on over here to spades themselves. Here's another example. These are two square point spades, and again, this one is made of a little bit thicker material, so it's going to last longer. But one thing that's missing on here is that lip on the top to put your foot on, and maybe it was too small to have. Now I want you to look at these two. This is a round point spade, and this is a safer feature. Now, this one needs cleaning up, and we're going to go over that in a few minutes, but see how the top of the blade bends forward to rest your foot on? That is much safer than this. This one curls back, and it's very easy to slip your foot off of it when you're digging, and you could maybe barf your ankle when you slip off the edge of it. And so when you're looking for a good one, look for one that points forward like that. That's going to be a safer feature. Last of all, if you're picking these out and you see one with a round point and one right here that's square, those are for two distinct functions. This spade, the square point spade, is for defining the edges of beds and giving yourself a bit of a border. But also, I want you to notice what happens when you dig with it. When you dig it up, you get a nice shovel full of soil, and it pretty well all leaves the hole. Okay? You get the full load out of there when you dig. Now, when you take a round point shovel, it's great for going through real hard soils and for really digging in. It doesn't define the edge of a bed very well because it's curved, and also when you dig with it, a good bit of it falls back down in the hole. And so there are distinct uses for these two. So you have some that always goes back in because the edges are not squared off. Now, like I said, they both have their uses in the garden, and so there's a purpose for both of them. Now we have one here that's had quite a bit of abuse. The wooden handle is starting to check a little bit, and by checking we mean this cracking right here. And the blade of this one is pretty well done for. And when you see one that's in this condition, you know it's had an awful lot of hard use, and probably there's not much good left in that blade, and we'll want to get a new one and put it on the handle. But one last point I want to make on quality before we go sharpen one of these is looking at the handle of it. You don't want to just look at the blade when you buy it. You want a nice straight grain on the wood itself, because that means that handle is going to last longer. Well, over at the studio barn on the deck, we've got a setup to show you how to sharpen one of these, because the last point I want to make is as you dig through the soil, you want a nice edge on these because you're putting all of your body force on there to try to push through the soil. And if it's completely flat across, like this one, and has no edge, it's going to take you a lot more force to do your winter digging. So let's go see how to put an edge on these. We can't overemphasize the importance of keeping your tools clean, especially when you go to store them away for quite some time. When you're through using them in the garden, use a wire brush like this, or if you don't have it, even a scrub brush to get the dry caked dirt off, because that holds in it a tiny bit of moisture, and that's where you can get rust started on your tools. Also, you might want to wipe it down with an oily rag or use a spray lubricant to coat the surfaces of them, especially before long-term storage. Now on the garden spade, we're talking about the difference between a flat blade and a round point out in the garden, and how a round point gets into the soil easier, but sometimes it doesn't dig as tidy a hole. One problem though with a garden spade is it's flat across and you don't have as much mechanical advantage to dig deep down. And a lot of them come with no edge on the blade. Well, what we have found is that if you'll put a little bit of a bevel on the front face of it, it will glide into the soil easier, and your weight behind it will work more efficiently. And the way to do that is, of course, clean it off first, and then just take a single cut file, not a cross cut, but a single cut. Some people call it a garden file or a bastard file, and just hold it at this end. Sometimes you can put that into a wooden handle, and a 7-inch is handy to carry around in the garden, but a bigger one is fine. And just take a nice smooth strokes going out away from the blade. And you can put about a 30-degree angle bevel on it. You don't want a real sharp bevel, because remember we were talking with the guys out at Stillwater Equipment, if you have too sharp a bevel and you get a real narrow edge here, you can nick it more easily. So about a 30-degree bevel. And then when you're done, you want to make sure you get it even all the way across. And we worked on this one for a little while before we started taping. Then you want to go around to the back side and just knock off the burrs. And what this does for you is when you dig into the soil, that will curl the soil up onto the face of the blade and not the back side. And again, it'll give you more mechanical advantage to have just that little bit of a bevel on there. Now what about the handles? If these have gotten too checked and dried or cracked and rough on any kind of handles, all you have to do is take some sandpaper. And we've already roughed this one up quite a bit. And then soak an old towel or a rag in boiled linseed oil. You don't want to use raw linseed oil because it'll never dry, but use a little bit of boiled linseed oil and just go over that handle with 2 light coats. And if you'll do that about twice a year, your wooden handles are going to stay in really nice shape, and those tools are going to feel a lot nicer to handle. Let's take a look over here at some other tools we use around the garden. And loppers are among my favorite, and I really like the ones that have a bypass type blade like this. And I have 2 different sizes of loppers. These some people call vine pruners because they're small and they're scaled to cut grapevines and blackberries and things like that. And then these larger ones are going to give you, again, more mechanical advantage. You can cut larger limbs. When you're done using these in the garden, you want to make sure that you coat them with a little bit of lubricant. Even petroleum jelly will work just fine, so you don't get rust in storage. And make sure you wipe off any gum or resins from the plants that you've been pruning, and then take a look at them. Make sure the blade has no nicks in it. Of course, you want to avoid cutting wire or anything that's going to cause a nick in that blade. And if you're going to sharpen it, use a whetstone or other fine tool and take your time with it. Never put these on a grinding wheel. It can really ruin the blades. Last of all, when you're picking these out, you want to look for ones that have a rubber bumper right here. This is solid rubber, and it bounces a little bit once you prune with it, and that absorbs a lot of shock and a lot of impact if you're out pruning all day. Now when you're looking at hand pruners, again, the bypass design is a very efficient design. It's easy on plants in the garden. You want to pick ones that have handles that fit your hand appropriately. This brand has several size gauges. This is a number 2. In my holster here, which is another handy thing to keep you from losing tools in the garden, I have a number 6, and it's meant for smaller hands like mine. And believe me, if you're out all day long opening and closing this, you want it to fit your hand comfortably. Last of all, there's a reason these are red, and that's so you can find them if you drop them. And we've done that with this trowel here. We've coated it with a little of bright red electrical tape. You can use bright orange or any other bright color so that if you drop it in the garden, you can find it. I'd avoid green though, because it'll blend in. But we hope we've given you some tips today on Oklahoma gardening, on tool care, and that you'll take some time, and it really is a pleasure to have nice quality tools. I just want to coat this knife with a little bit of electrical tape because we've lost it a time or two in the garden as well. Well, have a nice weekend and enjoy gardening here in Oklahoma.
We hope you enjoyed this video. It's part of our OK Gardening Classics YouTube channel. You can also find more recent videos on our Oklahoma Gardening YouTube channel. And join us on social media for great gardening tips, photos, and discussion.